available publicly to comply with our public meetings law. So Alina, if you wouldn't mind starting the recording, please. Thank you. So welcome everyone. I'm Karen Farkas. I am the PCRP manager at OPDS. This is our second attorney case manager work group session. Today, the first thing I wanted to do is just repeat the ground rules, which are that we would appreciate if everyone participates actively when there are opportunities to speak one at a time, to be candid and respectful in commentary, and to keep focused on the topic or question at hand. The chat will be disabled, but any additional thoughts people have, we can just put in the parking lot. And OPDS staff is intentionally going to try to keep our talking to a minimum so we can use this time to hear from you. So the goals for today's session is first to review the themes and trends we saw in the challenges, in your comments on the challenges and benefits of working in interdisciplinary teams from the last session. And then what we'll do is we'll transition to focusing on the case manager role of the attorney case manager practice routines, and assess and get from your feedback, talk about whether it accurately captures the roles and expectations of a case manager, and whether those practice routines need refinements or edits or additions to best facilitate the benefits of interdisciplinary practice and then minimize the challenges. So those are the goals for this session, and then we hope at our next session to have a parallel conversation, but on the attorney side of the interdisciplinary team. So I will now hand it to Gloria Vidal, our PCRP data analyst, who will talk through some of the themes that we heard from the last session.
Thanks, Karen. So I was taking notes when we met last time, and what I did with those notes is I went through and categorized the different types of comments we were hearing. So challenges, benefits, like areas where more information is needed. And then also who is like the major like actor, the person who is like related or responsible for like the benefit or the challenge. And I like using that kind of like data that I created from your guys's conversation, I was able to see that there are 26 benefits that were mentioned, and the majority of them were related to case manager practices, so 22 out of the 26. There were also a couple related to attorney and case manager, like behaviors together, and then also the OPDS PCRP structures and resources. And then on the challenges side, we heard 25 different challenges represented in the working group, and about half of those were related to OPDS and PCRP structures and resources limitations. Another maybe quarter of them were related to attorney practices, and a quarter of them approximately were related to external stakeholder practices or structures. And then the next slide, this is looking specifically at the benefits. So the 26 benefits that I was referencing, these are categorized into like who is like the responsible or related entity for the benefits. So the first two portions are case manager. And so again, like we saw, the majority of the benefits referenced were related to case managers. So the most referenced case manager practice or behavior characteristic, but that was cited as a benefit, is that they increase client trust and understanding of the process. 3 people referenced case managers having knowledge of system and resources. 3 people referenced having the case managers having key partnerships with DHS in the court. 2 people mentioned that the case manager added a social work lens. 2 people mentioned that case managers enhance client communication. 2 people mentioned that case managers assist with the client in completing their tasks. 2 mentioned that case managers who take initiative in our self-starters are really beneficial to the practice. Someone mentioned that case managers starting early in the case will assist the case progress. One person mentioned that case managers collaborate among each other, and that supports the practice. So then for the attorney and case managers, like acting together, we had 2 people mention that the collaboration between attorneys and case manager assists case progress. And then 2 people mentioned that the PCRP program overall improves the outcomes for their clients in their cases. So that's the overview of the benefits that we heard. And then the next slide is looking at the challenges. So again, almost half of the challenges we heard were related to OPDS and PCRP structures and resources. And so there were 3 people that mentioned that case manager turnover is a huge issue. 3 people that mentioned that the scarcity of the case manager resource is an issue. 2 people mentioned that there's lack of clarity around the role of the case manager and their responsibilities. Someone mentioned that the case manager relationship with DHS is not clearly defined. Someone else mentioned that a solo practitioner lacks access to case managers at shelter hearings. And one person mentioned that there's inconsistency in case manager skill sets, or at least the perception that there is. So then with the challenges that are related to attorneys, 4 people mentioned that attorneys are not looping in case managers. 2 people mentioned that attorneys are not readily available for case managers. And someone mentioned that it's challenging for the attorney to onboard the case manager early in the case. And then for external stakeholders, we heard 5 people mention that DHS is not looping in case managers into communication, and that from one person, the court is not including case managers at shelter hearings. And then challenges related to the case manager, we heard that there can be some challenges in the case manager shifting their relationship with DHS from a partnership or an adversarial relationship to a partnership. So those are the overall themes that we were able to capture from you guys last time. And Karen, you can go ahead and take it away now.
Oops, thanks, Gloria. So we thought that would be helpful in kind of laying a foundation for the conversation we're going to move into right now, which is talking about the case manager role and expectations and using the practice routines, which we sent along this morning and also in previous emails. We want that document to really be helpful in terms of having a clear, uniform understanding of the role of a case manager for onboarding new attorneys and new case managers, and to give guidance to current case managers and attorneys. So we really want to use that as a reference point, and hear from this group about whether those routines capture the tasks expected of a case manager to be successful in an interdisciplinary team, and really to reap the benefits that we saw called out in Gloria's analysis. And so we're going to share the routines with you so you can be looking at them. And while you're looking at them, and if you've reviewed them before, just to ask yourself, is there a task missing here? Is there a routine that requires clarification or additional guidance from OPDS? Is there a routine that is confusing or inconsistent with the practice as you see it? And when we're going through this, it would be very helpful if you identify the routine you are referencing, if you are referencing a routine and not speaking to something new that you think should be included in this benchmark guideline. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and now Nora is going to share her screen, and she's going to track this conversation.
Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
It's little. Can you?
Okay, hold on just a sec.
Okay.
Good. Is that better?
So if you can make it like 150% at the bottom.
Okay. Is that
Better.
better? Okay, hold on just a sec.
We can't see the bottom one
Yeah.
now, so if you could, there, great.
Got it. Okay.
So now, this is really just to kind of track our conversation, to mark whether there are certain routines that people are referring to more than others, and also to capture. We did ask for feedback for those of you who had time to provide us written feedback prior to the conversation, and we marked here the routines where we had previously received some suggestions from group members. So that's what this represents. So now is the conversation part of our work group. And if anyone wants to start speaking, if they have thoughts again on additions or edits or need for clarification on any of these practice routines.
Hi, this is Veronica. I just had like my initial thought and have thought before, is just like where it says provide support and advocacy at the direction of the referring attorney. And I know we like probably can't get super detailed and into the weeds on this, but maybe just having some ideas of different tasks to put on there, like for an example, like this or that. I don't know if that would be helpful, just to kind of have an idea of what kind of support and advocacy we can provide. So I don't know if just being a little bit more detailed on that would be helpful, but that was just my initial thought.
Thank you, Veronica.
This is Ryan Loosley. I also provided some written feedback on this line item. The statement at the direction of the referring attorney, I understand in general, we want to do what the attorney's asking us to do, but in the trenches, when you're actually doing the work, waiting for direction isn't kind of how I see that playing out. And I don't know if there's just another way to word that, but a lot of times the attorney's not available, and we know the goal is to get the kids home. So doing everything we can to support that, and sometimes it's after hours. So I mean, it kind of, and maybe it wasn't intended that we have to stop and get direction before we do something, but usually they've brought us on because they want us to do certain things, and we just need to move forward and do them. And maybe that's the direction, so maybe it's okay.
Thank you. Tony?
And I agree with Ryan, from an attorney's perspective, using the case managers as a force multiplier, so to speak. Having a clear line of what needs to be bounced off the attorney versus what falls into the realm of the social work skills that, I mean, quite frankly, I as an attorney kind of expect case managers to have, and having the position should be outlined a little bit better.
This is Jody Russell. I have something to say about that. I found with doing this job for quite some time now, attorneys a lot of times will refer me to a case, send me the discovery, give me a quick update, and then I don't know if it's because we have that trust with attorneys now that they know, automatically what you're going to do, and they're not necessarily always checking up on you. I don't know if that just comes with the job of working on so many cases, and then they're like, oh, you got this. I don't have to kind of watch over you or explain what I want. You kind of know exactly what you're doing in that role. So sometimes I think attorneys forget, we end up having new case managers, or we're switching things up, and yeah, I know they get busy and stuff, and they just get used to you as a case manager and know your role and what you're going to take care of. And so that could be a little bit of a challenge too with bringing new case managers on.
So just to clarify, Jody, are you still referring to 1B, providing support and advocacy at the direction of the referring attorney?
Yeah, because I think they don't always, give us direction or just because they know that you know your job because they've worked with you for so long. But then we have new case managers who aren't very familiar with how, how a case is laid out. And so some direction there might be helpful, especially for new case managers and new attorneys.
And
Karen,
And
did
I
you
know-
make notes of all these comments on this form, or do you have it?
Gloria's doing that.
I'm taking notes right now.
Okay.
And just to, and I know we're trying to do it this way so we can focus each of our conversations, but to the extent we can talk about the case manager's obligation in the partnership and focus on that side of the partnership as opposed to what the attorney should do, more about what the case manager should do and the guidance, the expertise and practices the case manager should engage in versus what the attorney should engage in. We're trying, I know that obviously they come together, so it's hard to separate them, but we're trying to separate them out and then bring them back together. So, and focus today on the case manager function and role and responsibility, just to clarify. But thank you, Jody. Melissa?
So I guess along those same lines, focusing on the case manager role, I would suggest then that it would say something along the lines of seek clarification from the attorney regarding parameters or scope of work as necessary, something to, I guess, clarify that. But I do think that case managers do flow from the attorney-client relationship, and so that work is done at essentially the direction of the attorney because that's how they're engaged in the process.
Thank you, Melissa. Jillian?
Thank you. I actually really like and fall back on this phrase a lot when I'm working with other folks in the community. One, when they're asking what I'm doing, or I might be working with a caseworker and they might either say to their client, like, oh, well, you can have your case manager help you with that. And as if it's an easy way to kind of clarify that I might not be working on the same types of issues with each client. I'm working, based on that direction from the attorney. So I find it really useful in terms of communicating my role.
Thank you, Jillian. Gentry?
Hello. I was kind of thinking about B along the lines of maybe just instead of, provide support and advocacy for the attorney, more of a kind of like a beginning, little case meeting of where the attorney wants us to go, where he kind of thinks you need to be assisting. And then down when you meet with the client, you provide on 4, where you provide insight to the attorney and kind of 6, I guess. What I've been doing is I had some new attorneys I've been working with. And so after I go and have like a really good, usually I have like a 1 or 2 hour meeting with the clients the first time. They usually have a lot to say when you're working with the parents. And so after I kind of have a good ballpark of that and I've read the discovery and kind of seen what all the needs are, then I send the attorney an email saying, this is kind of things I'm seeing I can work on, and this is my plan. Is it okay with you? And, this is what I'm seeing in the case. And then the one attorney I've been doing that with, she's been like, yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. And then like as other meetings happen, like someone before me just said, I forgot who said it, then the attorneys will say, yeah, that's something, you're in a meeting with the client and the attorney, and that's something your case manager can help you with. So, but I think maybe what's missing is, creating a plan for how you see your work going forward with the parents might be kind of good to add in there just to kind of clarify. And then of course, you know, things are going to come in and come out, but it's really nice for me just to say, this is what I see. This is what I, you know, because I know how DHS is here and all the players and all the resources. This is, you know, the plan that I think would be most effective for these guys. And then the attorney can weigh in and then you can collaborate that way.
Thank you, Gentry. Did I hear you correctly that you were seeing kind of like a chronological path in the practice routines and you were trying to talk through like steps?
Yeah, because you kind of have it laid out like steps and you know, maybe chronologically might be helpful, especially for those newer case managers. But I mean, I think we're working in general too. Like the attorney's like, here, we're going to refer you. Here's all the information. You know, maybe you have some time to review, you know, what they've sent so far. And then, okay, ask the attorney, you know, what direction do you see me needing to assist the most in this? Then, you know, you get prepared, you meet your clients, you have that really long first initial meeting if you can, and just really see how the case is going and see the client's perspective, and then create a plan, and then you can provide that plan to the attorney and see where it can be tweaked or not. And then, you know, of course, then after that, whatever other assistance would come up, then you would just incorporate that into your plan. But I really think you need a plan on a lot of these cases. Like, where do you see this? Because like I know, for example, visitation and the visitation supports here are like horrendous. And I have one attorney that's just like, oh yeah, parents communicate freely about all visitation. Well, that will end up biting parents in the butt so many different times because of different SSAs. And then they're saying parents said this and parents said that, and then they didn't call us. So what I've been doing too is like starting text chains with the parents or the parent and the SSA for all the check-ins that they do, because they get discredited. Oh, they didn't check in on time. And then once you do that, then you see, oh, wait a minute, DHS didn't check in when they were supposed to. They didn't follow their own procedures. So it just leaves a better track to just kind of nip that he said, she said in the butt that we have a lot in my county with the visitations. And there's other things too, like parents didn't do this and they didn't do that. And if you keep that chain of communication, then you can show the attorney, hey, you know, send them a screenshot on this day. You know, I got these visitation notes from Discovery saying the parent never checked in on time. Well, I have this from this date that says, yes, they did check in on time.
Thank you, Gentry. Dawn? You're on mute, Dawn.
Okay. Recognizing that the case managers are a finite resource and trying to avoid creep away from the goals. So I think that feeds to B, advocacy at the direction of the referring attorney, and then maybe down to in collaboration with the attorney. Something in these practice routines that empower the case manager to communicate with the client in a way that keeps the client from trying to adjust any kind of agenda would be really helpful. Because what I've seen is our clients sometimes just someone else standing by their side or doing a lot of things for them is ideal, and it starts to put pressure on the case workers, the case managers sometimes, to expand more at the direction of the client, instead of trying to stay focused on finite goals for a DHS case. That was pretty long-winded, but maybe some kind of practice routine that people can refer back to say, yeah, and this is in our guidelines or our rule or practices. Please be sure to use this tool to make sure that you're collaborating. It's the lawyer driving the train, listening to what you say as you learn things about the client, but what the client wants you to do, it's not what we do. In terms of what the case manager starts to do extra supports. I mean, our clients would love someone to do everything for them sometimes, or be there to support them in everything in their lives, particularly when the cases we're supposed to put case managers on are the 10% of our most needy clients. And we have to set parameters. So it would be helpful, or at least I think it might be helpful for us in the practice routines to have something in there that helps make sure we stay on the right course in what we're using this resource for.
Thank you, Dawn. And I'll use your comment as an opportunity to say that this list can also include what should not be done. So the practice routines can also capture, for instance, not to provide treatment to clients, not to be the parenting resource or the therapist to clients, not to be ordered by the court to do specific things. You know, there are the nots that could also help influence the practice routines, and that's certainly part of this conversation and something we could incorporate into the routines. Anyone else? Back to you, Stacy.
Sorry, I just wanted to reiterate, I think, the importance of not being afraid to reach out to the attorney whenever there's a question. I think that needs to be pretty plainly stated and first and foremost, because since we are kind of the orchestra leader here, we need to be able to ensure that we're able to direct what's going on for the benefit of our client. That's all. I think it's probably already been said.
I feel like we could spend a lot of time trying to define what direction means. I feel like that word in there seems to be, you know, what is direction and direction as to what. But I don't want to hijack the conversation just to do that. Ryan?
Thank you. To move on to another point on trying to find the number of this. So on 1D, when it says copy the attorney on all written communication with professionals and providers, I'd be interested in the group's input on this. I find that to be would be really problematic. We absolutely need to communicate with the attorney. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but I communicate a ton through text messaging or emails about a lot of little stuff that really the attorney doesn't, the day-to-day things that they don't need to know. I mean, they need to be updated periodically and kept appraised of what's happening in the case, but there's a lot of little things that if I communicated with them, they would spend all their time reading my emails. I mean, that's not a good use of their time, and it would just fill their inbox. And so I just am questioning that item in terms of its, you know, copying all written communication.
Thanks, Ryan. Matt?
I'll just say I appreciate Ryan's sentiments, and I'd go kind of like right back at you. Realistically, I'm not ever going to copy a case manager on every piece of communication in a case. You know, I think both attorneys and case managers are good at determining what the relevant material is that each other person needs to have in order to effectively do their job. And I think it would be reasonable not to have those kind of mandatory all communications, all shared communications as part of the relationship.
Thank you, Matt. Stacy, did you raise your hand again?
Yes, I did. I'm sorry. I just want to say I wholeheartedly agree. I do a lot of communicating with my case manager via text and via phone, and we summarize new information that we've gotten from other sources, and we collaborate. And I think that that works better. If she were to spend her time instead trying to copy me on all of the email exchanges she's had or the text she's exchanged, I agree, it would not be as efficient, and we wouldn't then have that time to do the, putting meeting of the minds and bouncing ideas off of each other. So I absolutely agree.
Thank you, Stacy. Melissa?
Thanks. I think that this is one of those things that is going to vary by attorney and by issue. And so I would suggest that this be one of those things that the attorney and the case manager discuss early on in the case, or early on in the referral process, so that they can understand each other's perspectives on that. Because, for example, if my case manager is sending an email to DHS regarding visitation or some other issue, I would likely want to be copied on that. But if it's just with some other supportive entity, I may not. And so I think clarifying that would be helpful.
Thank you, Melissa.
Karen, can you hear me? This is Kathleen Strack.
I can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. I can't figure out how to raise my hand. I'm just appearing by phone today, and I didn't get instructions for raising a hand, so I'm sorry to interrupt. But
Yeah, I wouldn't know how to help you do that anyways. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I just want to chime in and say I agree with Melissa. I think that it's important for the case managers to copy the attorney on communications with DHS for sure, so we know what they're saying to DHS and what DHS is saying to them. But in terms of including us on communications with all the other entities they might deal with, that's less important to me. And I agree with Melissa and Matt. I'm not going to include the case manager on every communication I turn out to have to do with this case. I'll be selective about what I include them on. And I also think it's important to keep in mind that, we have to walk a fine line here. The case managers aren't working for us. They're collaborating with us, and yes, we're the orchestra director, conductor, but they're not our employees. And the problem with getting too close and getting too much in control over the case manager's work is that we run the risk of losing that position of being collaborators, or so an attorney using a contractor versus an attorney supervising a staff member. And that's something I always have in the back of my mind when I'm working with the case manager, is they need some autonomy. I need to be kept updated on what they're doing. They need to be kept updated enough on what I'm doing to do their job well, but we can't be too much in each other's pockets, or we're going to lose that distance we need to maintain that that particular relationship, which is not that of a staff member and an employer.
Thank you, Kathleen. Leslie?
Yeah, I guess I just would add on to what Melissa and the last person who spoke, who I don't have her name, said, is that I feel like each case is so individual, and each relationship with the attorneys are all so unique. And so having that understanding at the beginning of a case with each attorney, I think, is really helpful. I think it's harder to have parameters that are really specific in terms of how we communicate. Some attorneys I communicate with all the time about everything, and we're in it all together. And then others, I sort of go off and do my work and filter it back, and vice versa. So I feel like they work, but they don't all work the same. So it's tough.
Thank you, Leslie. Dawn?
If the goal is to develop some practice routines, what Matt said and everyone else said is important. I think we maybe would modify that line or that paragraph in the practice routines to say relevant, and to say after a discussion or something like that. But I think we should have something in the practice routines to know that that is kind of an expectation that what's relevant. And from my perspective, I might not always read everyone, but I know the power of a DHS knowing that the case manager CC'd me, or that or even making sure my client knows that the case manager is communicating with me, so that people have then understanding of my role in the case versus the case manager. So maybe we could modify that line in the practice routines.
Thank you, Dawn. Yeah, I'm hearing that there are a couple of these where people feel like, as opposed to saying it in an absolute way, to say, to advise that there should be a conversation at the outset of the collaboration to define the unique parameters based on that case and that strategy, which I think is something we can try to make language to capture, to share back with the group to see if that works. So I'll ask another question. If do people have more comments? We do want to hear from everyone and not to call on people who haven't spoken, but does anyone have any other comments on these particular practice routines, or should we move the conversation to what is outside the scope of the case manager role and talking about defining that and being clear on that?
This is Ryan Loosely. I just have one comment about something that's missing. I don't know when we would talk about that, but
Yeah, fine.
So I feel like there needs to be a practice routine that helps the case manager understand the importance of becoming familiar with the jurisdictional basis, the conditions of return, and the expected outcomes. Those drive the case, and so many times DHS gets skewed from what those are and lose focus and have to be brought back to the realities of those three things. Particularly jurisdictional basis and the conditions of return. And DHS is always modifying that policy on conditions of return, and some people don't, and even their own caseworkers don't pay attention to the changes in language and the fact that there can be some things out of control, for example. So that would just be a suggestion.
Thank you, Ryan.
This is Gentry, and I think that'd be really beneficial also, what Ryan just said.
Thank you, Gentry. There are a lot of people clapping hands for those of you on the phone. Tony?
Yeah, I think that ties into the number 4 of the practice routine, providing insight to the attorney on social work perspective. Without a grasp on those conditions for return and the jurisdictional bases, you can't make a good social work plan, quite frankly. And then also number 8, so maybe make 4 and 8 subsections of familiarization with the jurisdictional bases and conditions for return, because I think that's really key to making a successful social work perspective or a social work plan.
Thank you, Tony. Melissa?
So I agree that it's really important for case managers to understand all of that. But there are also times when I'm extremely concerned about things that are unrelated to the jurisdictional bases because they impact my client's ability to engage in services to ameliorate the jurisdictional bases. So while I agree that that's what drives the case plan, that might be one of the reasons that I'm engaging the services of a case manager, is because there are things outside of the jurisdictional bases that my client needs assistance with. like accessing other services that are not court ordered that will enable them to better engage in the court ordered services. So I just wanted to put that out there.
So Melissa, it sounds like you're sort of talking about number 6 with the collateral issues that may not be directly related to the legal issues at hand in the case, but that have an impact. Is that right?
They could be, but also in response to what Ryan was saying about the jurisdictional bases, and I know that drives the case plan, but that might not necessarily drive the work that my case manager is doing on a particular case.
Right.
Thank you, Melissa. Jillian?
I would agree with that. Very often I'm working on other issues that are maybe, kind of come to light because of our unique relationship with these clients. Oftentimes domestic violence or substance abuse issues really might not end up getting disclosed, with other parties, but we can work on that within our legal team.
Thank you, Jillian. Any other thoughts from the group on needs for clarification or additions or edits?
I'm wondering, and I'm just this is coming to me as everyone's discussing collateral issues and things like that, that there may need to be some parameters around our role in collateral issues, like in particular, like substance use. I find that case managers are often expected to act in the role of like a parent mentor or a sponsor, and like that is not our role. And so how involved a case manager should and can be in these collateral issues, I think is really important. Because I think that's what leads to confusion around what a case manager should be doing, can be doing, potential burnout, things like that, because there may be a level of over involvement or just taking on too much or doing things that are outside of our scope. And so I think with collateral issues that could be like a 6A, B, C, D potentially, discussing like what exactly our role is, how far we should be taking that, and this may even just be something like for a training for new case managers or something, when it is appropriate to pass these things off to like actual service providers and things like that, just a little bit more structure around involvement on those things.
Thank you, Jordan. Yeah, I hear, you mentioning the line between direct service and treatment and where that is and how to define that, which I do think is an important thing to highlight in here. Dana?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, what's been discussed and I think Karen, you and I have talked about before, like creating some sort of a tool or a roadmap that really gives some guidance around what that initial meeting looks like between a case manager and an attorney, and like things that might be helpful to discuss, like the allegations, what the legal strategy is from the attorney's perspective and what the goals are, what communication with DHS or other parties look like and copying. I wonder if it would be helpful to have some sort of guidance on how that initial meeting would look like between an attorney and case manager to cover kind of all of these things that we're talking around with direction and scope of advocacy and things like that.
Thank you, Dana. Matt, I think your hand was up. Is it down now?
I wasn't sure if I wanted to add, with what's just been said, I guess I hope there's not a lot of times where case managers have felt like we as attorneys are asking for things that are inappropriate, but I don't know. And I don't know if there have been a lot of times when clients have been asking case managers to do things that then a case manager feels obligated to do, but doesn't really think they should or is part of the plan. I've never had a case manager say to me, well, I couldn't get to the stuff you wanted because I was doing the stuff the client wanted. You know, I guess I feel like, but I mean, I would always want to be in a position to say to a client like, hey, this is not, you know, this isn't part of what Lucille or David or whomever, whatever they do. I really like the idea of having, you know, the initial meeting with the case manager having an initial meeting with a client and developing a plan. But I guess I kind of still feel like I'm at the point where it's like, if I have a case manager, I have a brand new general contractor where I'm kind of like, can you do this? Would this be okay? And, you know, until I have a list of things that I can ask a case manager to do and a list of things I can't, I think it's really hard to, I'll just develop the plan in the dark if we're going to meet about what would be appropriate and or what case manager could do, and just hope that the case manager isn't offended by what I'm asking for. I just still, even in this, in terms of what the practice routine should be, I still don't really know what kind of the contours are of what the case managers, what's appropriate for them to be doing.
Does anyone want to try answering that? What is a case manager supposed to be doing? What is that role?
This is Gentry. I think just to I think that as a case manager, I kind of have a little bit of a fear of rejection, I guess, also too, or just, you know, like if they did ask you something, I guess as myself, I just try to develop a relationship with the attorney to where if they ask me something that I don't feel comfortable with, I can just say, I don't feel comfortable with that. So I think just both of us being aware that it's okay to ask that and it's okay to answer with a no if we can't do it.
This is Kathleen. I just want to say, you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay, good. I'm a little confused by this topic because the scope of what a case manager can do isn't something I really understand either. It's pretty broad. If you look at the contracting language, it says communicate, engage, and motivate clients to participate in their case plan. That covers a lot of potential ground for a case manager's work with a client. And in my experience working with the case managers, that varies a lot from client to client and from one point in the case to another. I haven't had a case manager yet tell me when I've asked them to do something specific that wasn't something they felt comfortable doing. I hope it's not because they didn't feel comfortable telling me that, but I haven't gotten any remark that indicated I was asking for anything that particular case manager felt was outside the scope of what could be expected from them. That being said, maybe it would be real helpful to develop some examples that could be included in this list of what are typical activities for a case manager. So those of us attorneys know, you know, what can we reasonably expect to be able to ask the case manager to do with our clients? Support, you know, communicate, engage, and motivate is really pretty broad. So if there are some things OPDS doesn't think we should be asking the case managers to do, I think it'd be real helpful to have those things sort of defined somewhere.
Yeah,
I think Dana.
I do want to state that I'm not answering what I think a case manager is or what OPDS believes a case manager is because I don't know or haven't thought about it, but just because I don't think that's the purpose of this work group is for you to hear from us, rather for this group to talk to each other about like the practice application of things. I think, did someone try to speak when I was speaking a second ago?
Karen, Dana had her hand up at one point.
Dana, yeah.
Sorry, I just, you know, we have a list of roles of case managers that talks about, you know, all the different ways that case managers can be supportive. So, you know, perhaps we could incorporate that into part of this document. And it also talks, you know, about what case managers are not when it comes to, you know, fact witnesses or investigation and things like that. So, you know, it might be helpful to recirculate that. I mean, I know it's on our portal and we've provided it, But I think it's, it's not exhaustive of what case manager roles can be, but I think it's pretty descriptive of the different ways that case managers can be supportive in cases.
Thank you, Dana. Jody?
Hey, I agree with Dana and Kathleen on what they're saying. And there's been times where I've been asked from attorneys to do something, and I haven't ever felt like uncomfortable or I couldn't do it. But there has been times where I've had to ask the attorney, well, could you support me on a meeting with DHS, instead of me just on my own? So I think having that communication with the attorney, if there is something uncomfortable, not necessarily that they're asking you to do, but, for instance, with having a meeting with DHS, wanting them there, or doing a Zoom call or something like that. But as far as even with, Kathleen, working with her, I haven't had any of that issues of attorneys asking us something that we shouldn't be doing. So, but I do agree with Dana. We do have that list, and it would be helpful to, maybe go over it every so often, or incorporate that with, new case managers as well.
Thank you, Jody. Any other thoughts on this or other things on the routines, and if you think that you are done and you've shared every thought you have on these routines, raise your hand, because we don't need to stay on to talk this to death if people feel like they're done with this conversation.
This is Kathleen. I have one thing I wanted to ask
please.
about, because I missed the beginning of the call. Did you guys talk about reporting back to attorneys? I don't like feeling like I've sent a case manager out to do a job. They're out there working on their own, and then I'm not getting feedback. It's real important to me to get routine, regular reports from case managers. Did you guys talk about that earlier in the meeting?
We were speaking in reference to the practice routines and things that need to be added or edited here. And this is the case manager side. It requires it doesn't specifically say about routine and regular updates in this list right here.
It's actually 1C. Provide attorneys.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Including sharing information relayed by the client or other entities. So it says provide attorneys with regular client updates and maintain consistent contact with the attorney, including sharing information relayed by the client or other entities. So that's the language in the practice routines. We haven't talked about it specifically.
Yeah, and that was my question. I know the language is there, but I just wondered if you guys had talked about it, and if you had, what are people thinking that should look like? Or is it, again, going to be one of those things that's going to vary depending on how much work is happening on that case?
So I think that we talked about with this one, about this also being something that is decided based on those specific cases and those specific clients, to decide what kind of consistency, what needs to be relayed at what frequency and in what way. Is there something more specific you think should be included?
Well, personally, I would be real happy if there was kind of a standard expectation for the case manager to report back to the attorney at least monthly. So we have something we have in our file that says the case manager has updated us on his or her work, and we know where they're at and what they're doing, what's going on from their perspective. And if not much is happening, maybe once a month is enough. But I say that because it's sometimes not clear when a case manager has sort of dropped off a case. And that kind of a regular update would help us know whether there is a continuing work going on with that client, or really whether it's time to curtail it and let the case manager move on to another case. And it's hard for me to ride herd on the case. If I'm going to work with several case managers, I don't want to have to ride herd on them and remember to ask them to send me a regular update. I'd rather it was just an expectation that all case managers update their attorneys regarding the clients they're working with at least, and then have some kind of expectation once a month or whatever people feel is appropriate, so that it's, you know, consistent and there's a minimum threshold, and then more communication, of course, as need be, but we have some kind of minimum baseline expectation that there'll be a regular report made.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. Does anyone have thoughts on the minimum threshold that Kathleen is suggesting?
Well, I wonder if that could be more of like a collaborative two-way street type thing. And I don't know if this is something that we're doing at the next one, or when it comes to like attorney roles, or I don't know. But I will say, you know, we also are working with several people, and it can be very daunting for us to constantly be reaching out to attorneys for updates. And I'll say, you know, and I work in multiple counties, so I'm getting a lot of different experiences from a lot of different attorneys. I don't always know what's going on in my cases. I'm either hearing it directly from the client, which can be confusing because that tends to be more of like an emotional response to something that occurred. Or I just, you know, the client's not entirely engaged with me as the case manager, and then because of that, I just don't really know what's happening if the, you know, we're between court hearings, things like that. So I wonder if it could be more of a collaborative, like, expectation that the attorneys and the case managers are meeting, so it's not just put on one person, because we also are busy and working with several different folks, and it can be really hard for us to be chasing attorneys down as well.
Thank you, Jordan. So it's 12:59. Stacy and Jody have their hands raised, and if everyone doesn't mind, I'd love to hear from them before we wrap up this conversation. And just to Jordan's point, you know, we are going to be talking about the attorney routines and the both routines at the next session. And I do think a lot of the conversations we're having here will really inform that conversation. And again, we'll review the themes before we jump into that. Stacy?
Thank you. So I was just thinking that often if the case manager hasn't worked with a client for like a significant period of time, you know, when we do our monthly reports, we check that we've got a case manager on board for the entire life of the case, even if there are periods of time when the caseworker or the case manager is not actually doing anything. And so I guess from my perspective, I kind of rely on the case manager to essentially, I guess I don't know how to say it, manage the caseload that they have. And like, I will ask, do you have room? Can you take this? Even if maybe they've got a case that they're not working on currently, maybe they can, you know, work on the new case at the moment. And then of course it's going to lag. And so it would, I don't know that like doing a regular form or something that we would fill out and then do an exchange would be helpful, at least for me. I am in nearly daily contact with the case manager that I work with because we've got several cases going. And I mean, it makes sense, especially for bigger counties, to, you know, maybe have some sort of a minimum monthly requirement. If I didn't hear from her in a month, I would send a police officer out for a welfare check on her, frankly. So, I mean, I think that is really going to be county specific, attorney specific, and, you know, working relationship specific as well as case specific. So I would be supportive of some general guidelines, but I would hate to see hard and fast rules that end up causing more of a burden than a help for the system. I hope that was clear.
Thank you, Stacy. And Jody?
I would have to agree with, with that and with what Kathleen was saying. Sometimes it's just a quick update in an email once a month, and then sometimes you're talking to attorneys several times a week. So it's kind of one of those things that are, some cases are more, you're in communication with, others you're not so much in communication with the attorney. But once a month, I think is fair, just to keep the attorney updated and to keep the case manager updated. I know, and Dana might be able to talk more about this, but at the beginning of the year, she had sent us out some forms, and one of them was for that, just to fill out once a month and send off to attorney as a, a quick, just a quick update. And I know some attorneys, they like that, and other attorneys just want a quick email. So I don't think it's too much of a burden to take a couple minutes each month and write up a quick update and send it off. But, it might vary between attorneys and case managers and caseloads. There's a lot going into that. So I agree, it would be hard to put some real rules and restrictions on that, but we don't want to not have each other held accountable as far as the updates that could really benefit the case, of letting the attorney know, what you're taking care of, and updates on housing. I mean, there's a lot of updates you can give.
Thank you, Jody. Dana?
Yeah, I know we're running out of time, but
Yeah.
We do train case managers. There's a monthly service update form that case managers are trained to complete each month, that look at like the number of hours they provided to the client, the barriers that exist, the progress that's been made. Some of the feedback we've gotten from lawyers is that, most of what's contained in that report has already been communicated to the attorney, so it's kind of a duplicate. So I agree with Jody and what others have said, that, maybe based on what the attorney is wanting, either that be a monthly email or a monthly service update in a format. But yeah, to me, monthly updates is not unreasonable at all. And I think case managers are typically having a lot more contact than that.
Thank you, Dana. So I will wrap it up now. Thank you so much for all of your feedback. I appreciate if the structure of this conversation is a little, free flowing, and we're just trying to make sure we're getting people's organic thoughts. And it's very helpful to know where there's confusion or needs for clarification and additions. And I'm excited to continue with the conversations and come up with a product that can be helpful for current and future PCRP teams. So thank you again. Please, we'll reach out before the next meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.